Hello, Barney. Do you want to introduce yourself and say a little bit about your research background?
Yeah, I'm Barney Dunn. I'm a professor of clinical psychology at the University of Exeter, and I'm currently an NIHR Career Development Fellow. And most of my work is about trying to develop a new talking treatment for depression that builds positive affect as well as reducing negative affect.
So you mentioned there that you're an NIHR fellow, so it'd be really great if you could talk a bit about your funding background and particularly any tips you can share about accessing funding for clinical research.
Yeah, so the first thing to say is I did my PhD before doing my clinical training, and then I went back into a postdoctoral role in Cambridge. And I was very much a basic scientist then, and I realized what I wanted to do was more applied research that fitted with the kind of NIHR remit. So I moved to Exeter to try and set up my own research group and get funding. And actually, to get the funding, I had to work really, really hard. So I had this idea of a good talking treatment for depression, but I had to apply for a lot of different fellowships to eventually get it funded. I first tried what was called a Welcome Intermediate Clinical Fellowship, and they said they liked me, but the project needed to be tighter. Could I go back the next year? So I went back the next year, and they said, actually, it's still not quite what we want. I went for an ERC starter grant, and that didn't get past the first stage of shortlisting. I went for an MRC Clinician Scientist Fellowship Award, and that came back actually very squarely rejected with quite negative reviews, more than the welcome ones have been. Then I applied with pretty much the same project to the NIHR, and I got really close, and they gave me a very encouraging feedback to apply the next year, which I did, and then I eventually got it. So I guess the first learning point for me there is you've got to have quite a lot of grit. You've got to really believe in what you're doing, and you've got to stick at it. But critically, you've got to try and respond to feedback while recognizing you're a human being in a constructive fashion. So my usual reaction is, they're such idiots, why haven't they got it? Followed by, I'm such an idiot, why am I so stupid and can't write a better grant? To actually, there's some wisdom in what they said, and I can harness that to make it better. So really listening to feedback, not taking it personally, and realizing it's just a competitive old world out there, helped me stay with it. The other tip is, because getting funding is quite hard, you need a plan B to keep the wolf from the door. So I had a academic job where I was doing some unfunded basic science research and doing undergraduate teaching. So I didn't have that uncertainty of not being able to pay my mortgage or stuff like that. So to some extent, I could afford to take the risks of applying for fellowship funding. And the third thing was, it's really good to look after yourself and have a life outside of work and hang out with your kids and have other things going on, so that you're not over invested in trying to get funding. It's a bit like happiness. The more you value it, the more it distresses you when you don't get it, and the less you value it, the easier it is to get and keep and to go with.
And it sounds like perseverance has been quite a key feature there as well. And I guess that last point is something that's made it a bit easier to do that. And I think that perseverance is definitely something that's come across in lots of our interviews. So clearly, I think your last point is probably part of the key to how you've managed to persevere so effectively. Any other thoughts about that?
Well, just at what point does perseverance become perseverance? And for me, it's kind of, if you've got the right idea and you sound it out with patients and they tell you, actually, that kind of is sensible, and you have some data that suggests it's a good idea. For me, actually, that's just helpful grit and pursuing things. So just keep going and accept that if you put in a really good grant application, it's then a roll of the dice as to whether you get it or not. Whereas if you put in a bad grant application, you know for a fact you're not going to get it. So once I realized what I'm doing is giving myself a chance of buying a ticket in the lottery, I took it less personally when I got the rejections.
Yeah, good, thank you. And so then once you did get the funding, and you've obviously been on your fellowship for a little while now, can you say a little bit about your tips for really making the most of that once you've got it?
Well, the first thing to say is it's brilliant when you get it. I mean, I've never had more fun at work. Doing applied health services research that's really exciting, that benefits patients, and a really great personal training program and a lot of autonomy that goes with it. So it was definitely worth the grit. So some of the challenges about really taking that opportunity is your host institute. It's really important to be clear in the application how they're going to support you, and expect to have to negotiate quite hard to get that support in all cases, because life's just busy and people have other targets. Exeter's a really good place to work, but at times I have had to fight my corner to be protected to deliver my research time. And I think that might be doubly so if your host is an NHS trust, because trusts are under a lot of service pressures, and so it's hard to always release you for the time they've promised to. The second thing is, if you're doing patient-facing trials research, getting recruitment working is the key challenge, and anything you can do to build relationships to make that work really, really helps. So once I'd sorted out the time I was supposed to get, I'd come up with a recruitment pipeline, and I had negotiated the excess treatment costs, which are what the NHS pays you to do experimental research on top of usual care. It all worked quite smoothly, but those three things were the challenges.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And is there anything else that you think would be useful to share with people who are thinking about developing clinical psychology research?
I guess one sense I've got is it's quite intimidating knowing where to start, particularly if you're a research interested clinician who hasn't yet got a massive track record. And I guess the invitation would be to start small and gradually grow. And where it's really good to start is the stuff that is your routine clinical business, and just evaluate that with a bit more methodological rigor. So say, for example, you want to get onto a clinical academic pathway, start with writing up a few case studies of your work, or the kind of patients that come into your service and what characteristics they have. Get that into any kind of publication, and then that's the first proof that might get you your first fellowship to begin to develop more research skills. So view it as a bit like a stone you're pushing down a mountain. It's quite a small stone to start with, and it gradually gathers momentum and force. Don't think you have to run a massive multi-center trial as the first bit of research you've ever done, or else it will blow your mind.
Yeah, and certainly from being on the doctoral research fellowship panels, one of the things that I noticed is a lot of medics seem to have, a number of papers, but a lot of them are exactly as you described, case studies, but also opinion pieces as well that they've written for clinical journals. And I think it does all evidence that people can, get it together, document things, want to evidence things, get discussions going, and that all counts at that stage.
Yeah, the only other thing I'd say as well is, if you're a clinician interested in getting into research and you're feeling a bit unsupported and lonely at the clinical coalface doing it, don't be shy to reach out to academics, because there's plenty of academics sitting in their ivory tower offices wondering, does anyone know I exist? Has anyone ever read my papers? I'd love it if I could find some patients to recruit into research. We love it if someone sounds interested and bangs on our door. And actually, it can become quite quickly a symbiotic relationship where it's good for both of you. So try and find an academic partner stroke mentor. There's plenty of them out there.
Yeah, and we can help people meet each other, can't we?
Yeah. So do you want to say a bit about who we are then in that context, Kathy?
So Barney and I are NIHR advocates for practitioner psychologists, which includes clinical psychologists, health psychologists, counselling psychologists, and other psychologists who are HCPC registered. And our role there is really to try and promote research careers amongst practitioner psychologists. So one way in which we're doing that is trying to share tips through videos like this, and share other information more broadly. If you don't already, then do follow us on Twitter at clin_psy_res. And also, one of the other things we do a lot of is helping people who are putting in different applications, either giving them feedback ourselves or linking them up with other people who might be able to get some feedback. So we're really keen to help sort of match make where there could be partnerships there, where people might benefit from support or mentorship. So yeah, do get in touch with us about that. Do you want to add anything else about that, Barney?
No, as someone described us yesterday, it's like you're like the Tinder of research. I think we're all right.
Nice. Great. Is there anything else you want to share, Barney?
No, that's all good. Thanks for interviewing me, Kathy.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.